Hello and welcome everyone to today's live session. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. We were just getting stuck in digging into some of the cool stuff for today. So we're going to get going. This is a live session. This is part of our Microsoft 365 Champions group. We're really just trying to, there's so much to learn in the 365 platform that we're just trying to educate ourselves, but also share that and bring expert folks in like Wes, who has lots of wisdom to share and different aspects and ways to think through some of the opportunities and challenges and that exist inside of 365. And so ultimately, I think, we did a session called Unlocking the Potential of 365, and we nowhere near came close enough to everything. But I think that's really kind of our goal. We're just trying to help everyone see what's out there to unlock the potential of what you can do in 365. And effectively, pretty much nearly everything we show, you're already paying for it anyway. So let's try and help you figure out a way to use it to solve problems that everybody has. So with that said, Wes, today I know we're going to talk about managing requests in Microsoft 365 and kind of the simplicity of it, but trying to help people think through it and show them how simple it is. But you're going to touch on or hint on some more advanced things that are capable. So Wes, maybe introduce yourself a little bit and take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Wes Preston. I'm in the same geography here as Nate in the Twin Cities. I'm in Minnesota. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm an independent consultant. I do lots of stuff. But I've been working in the SharePoint and M365 space for a long time. So I share a lot of the same concerns or the same passion for sharing, all of the fun stuff that's out there and that frankly, most people just don't even realize is there. So that's what we're talking about. Request management. There's a lot of different terms for this. I hear the term intake forms quite a bit, but there's, did I get the right scope here? There we go. So, to bring us into context, what we're talking about is collecting information. For a long time, there were lots of different ways that people collected information in terms of, hey, I need office supplies. Hey, I need sales materials or marketing materials, things that there's always someone requesting something from someone else. I mentioned that I was going to, have this chat today with my wife, and the quote that's there is hers. She works for a large enterprise, and it's all these teams are constantly asking each other for stuff, right? It might be data, it might be resources, it might be whatever. It's whatever that team supplies or services, to other teams, and they're constantly taking these requests, right? So that's kind of what we're talking about, and they might be as simplistic, like I said, as sales materials or office supplies, but it might be something more complex, like onboarding or training requests or travel, things that need approval and things like that. So it's a pretty broad spectrum, but the way that we see that day to day, it tended to start with things like someone walks past your desk and asks, I need 15 pencils. It starts as basic as that, and it gets more complex as it goes on. But that's where things started, and as we started getting more of these technology tools, people maybe started using Excel. I would still say the biggest one I see when I visit clients is an email. People will send an email and say, hey, I need X. The person that is servicing those requests keeps them maybe in a folder in their Outlook, right? And as they complete them, they'll delete the message or something like that. Those are all fine and good when it's one person doing all that. But if that person goes on vacation, leaves the company, whatever, that process breaks. So one of the very, very simple things, I take it for granted calling it simple. What are you saying, Nate?
I would say, Wes, we just don't let those people take vacation. So just make sure that's the expectation you set when you have people taking requests like that.
Or that they take it with them, right? It's a mobile app.
Exactly. They work on it naturally.
Yeah. So there's all of those options that are out there. But we're trying to make that a little bit easier, right? So even if they do take it with them, we can put it in the cloud. We started with things like Excel files. People kind of did that, but it wasn't as popular as a lot of other folks did. But Microsoft came out with these things called lists. For a long time, they still are. They were associated with SharePoint. They've since kind of pulled it out to be its own its own app within M365. So if we go over to, if we get into M365, you always go to this app launcher. You might see it show up here as lists. You might have to go to more apps. So you get the big page with all of the apps, and you can get into lists there. I'm not going to open up a whole bunch of other windows, but it'll look like this when you start. If you go through SharePoint, it might look a little bit different. I'm not going to jump in there quite yet. But this is where lists live. So the idea that I'm talking about today is instead of tracking these things with all these manual methods, with a piece of paper or what have you, let's create a list. And it's as easy as saying, hey, I want a new list. They have lots of interface stuff for templates. Sometimes we use them, sometimes we don't. I generally start from a blank list, and you're going to go through and give it a name and then pick out your fields. I don't want to bore everyone with that step, so I'm just going to jump into the list that I created. But let's talk about that. Well, let's go back into this. So the context is I can come up with something super complex, like an onboarding process, right? But we're going to find something that's in the middle here, where I have some specific things that I want to track. If I jump back into my slides, the challenges that I want to get past is being able to get complete information. All right. So there's two pieces here. If someone sent me an email and said, hey, I need X, 9 times out of 10, they gave me 80% of the information, and I have to jump back in and say, okay, well, I can get you that, but what about X, Y, and Z? And they give me that information, I can complete it. So that's a little bit more effort than we would like to see. The other thing is keeping track, right? So I mentioned that if people did this via email, it'd be in an inbox or a folder somewhere. So if I delete it when I complete that effort, I fulfill that request, I delete the email, it's gone. I have no way to track that. If I use lists, all of that stuff stays in that list. I can say it's completed. I can track additional information. I can control when I say complete the information you need. Instead of them guessing what that information is, I can set a list up to say I need this data, and this data, and then they'll see it. So the list is the data side of things. So you need to build that data repository, and then what you'll see, which is a little. If you've been in the Microsoft space for a long time, you're probably taking for granted that you're used to it. I say, hey, I want a new request and add a new item, and I get this form that is not user-friendly, right? So if people are SharePoint savvy or list savvy, that's fine. They can come in here and fill this out, but that's too much information and the wrong information. Usually when I'm setting up a request, I need 3 or 4 pieces of information from them. That's it. I might add additional fields so that I can control the process. So we've got our list that's got all of that data in it. Now Microsoft has given us a couple of other tools for doing the forms management piece. So they've added this forms experience. They call it the new forms experience. Honestly, this is the first time I've seen them change the interface, so it actually just says forms, which is kind of nice. I can come out here and I can say, hey, I'm going to create a new form, and it gives me all the data. But now I can come out here and say, listen, I don't want to give them the data signed or the renewal date. The notes are for me.
I didn't know that, Wes.
What was that?
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's cool.
I can simplify it. To me, this is one of the biggest things that's been a problem for years with people that were using lists is that one, I needed 4 or 5 fields, but I needed like 10 or 15 in order to track the whole thing. For a while now, for probably 3-4 years, we've had Power Apps, which I'll show you here in a second. It's a more advanced version. It gave us the ability to tweak and build this interface, but it's more of an advanced piece. This is so super simple, and it does a couple of things, right? It simplifies it so that I can say, if you're a requester, I just need these pieces of data. I can give it a title, whatever I do with that. And when I send the form, I'm really just getting a link to it. I can also customize it with themes and settings, but all I'm doing is getting the link. Now, one of the other challenges, I'm going to shut that down. The other challenges I had with this interface is that if I use these standard forms, they had access to this list. They have access to see it.
That's what I was going to ask, Wes. I was going to ask about permissioning. That avoids you having to like apply permissions or something like that to the list.
Correct.
In order to get feedback. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, there's two things here. It's kind of extending the security by obscurity model, which I'm not a fan of, right? Because if I'm filling out this form, here's what a completed form might look like. If I'm filling this out, I have access to enter data into this list. So if I know where this list is, I can still come here and add things to it. I want them to use this, but that means they have to have permissions to do this. So it's security by obscurity, right?
So by sharing the link, it gives them access to the list. Is that what you're saying? Or
well, they have to have access to the list they have to have permissions to add items to the list. That means from a list perspective,
they have access. Yeah,
they have access to it.
Got it. Yeah, but unless you know how to get there where it lives, you could probably do a search and find something. But yeah, I'm with you. I get it. I have another nuanced question, by the way, because when you're taking the data. By the way, I didn't know you could do that, but that's awesome that you can basically, because there's a lot of times if you're going to take that list, you might have some fields like categorization or tracking or what was the outcome or did you complete it, like all kinds of other things are here that aren't applicable to entering the data in the first time.
Yep.
Right. So I love that you can just kind of simplify the data entry part and not have to think about answering the questions that you don't need to answer. So I think that's awesome. Do you have to align? Because when you create a list, you can mark certain fields as required. Does that mess it up? Like, so if you create a list item that's required and then you create a form that doesn't include that required field, will that work?
I think it sticks with it. I'd have to test it just to.
Sorry, I'm not trying to throw your curveball.
No, it's not at all.
I was like, it just made me wonder how that might work.
Yep. So you can see right here, it's not giving me any of those options. So my understanding is that, and the reason, and I'll tell you right now, the reason that I'm hedging my bets is because this looks almost identical to Microsoft Forms. So they took a lot of the branding from that. If I was doing this in Microsoft Forms, it would ask me explicitly in this form. I'm going to use the word forms quite a bit.
Right.
In this page, it would ask me explicitly for each of those fields, is it required or not? It's not doing that here, so I'm assuming that it's inheriting that from the list.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Wes, from this basic kind of design, I'm assuming this is really mainly for data entry. So I know that that's what people will ask next is like, how do I find existing stuff? So maybe I want to do a search. So I'm assuming this isn't for that. That would be more of a Power Apps type of thing to kind of build in that searchability.
Correct. So there's a couple of different pieces to that. So if we're just in the list interface, I can also build out views. So you've got this thing over here called add views.
Yeah.
So you can use that. That's the way that we've done it for a long, long time is come out here and say, all right, I want to add a view that says, show me my requests or show me, whatever however I'm going to filter, sort, and choose the fields that I want to display. So that was the first way that I did it. But Power Apps is certainly the kind of the next step, right? It's in the slides I talk about, and we'll jump back there. The slides are going to be more of a structure for us, so you can use those later. It's kind of a good, better, best, or a crawl, walk, and run kind of approach. What most people will likely do is come in and first they'll build the data, then they'll tweak the forms so that they have that great entry point into it. Then building it up further is where you get into using Power Apps. You talk about the different roles that are the different people that are going to be accessing the data. In my opinion, the best way to do that is to start to incorporate Power Apps because you can build what I would call role-based forms. So you can go out there and say, if I'm a requester, here's a form or an app that I'm going to use, and I'll only show them the data that I want to show them, versus something like a person who's the person that's fulfilling the requests, or a triage person, I'm going to have different data for those different groups. So I'm going to build role-based forms, and I'll do that using Power Apps. So does that kind of get to your point, Nina?
Yeah, no, very helpful. And it was kind of, as I was looking at forms, I was like, I think there's very specific use cases for that. So somebody that didn't need to see all of that existing data and they were just really doing entries like a request or something like that, it makes total sense. But yeah, that was like, well, what do we do now? We want to take it the next step, and somebody has to review it or search for, maybe it's an inventory type of list, and they want to see kind of what's checked in and what's checked out.
Yep.
That would be kind of like the Power Apps piece, I think.
Yeah, and this particular use case, the parking passes, right? That's not something where I'm likely to build an interface like that, just because it's not one they're going to want. Right. What I'll likely do, and we were talking about this real briefly before we started recording, was I might add some workflows to this, so that because I'm not going to build them an interface, I might build a couple of pretty simplistic workflows that say something like, I'm going to send an email to say, oh, we've received your request. It's in this state. Oh, your pass has been assigned. You send another email so that when I come in here and add a pass number, or I say complete, I change a status, which I didn't add a status field. If I change the status, that might kick off a workflow that says, oh, it's been assigned. So now I'm going to send an email to the person that requested it to say your pass has been assigned, your manager has it, or something like that, right? So I might start stemming off a couple of workflows. So that's another kind of good, better, best, or crawl, walk, run kind of thing.
Well, and Wes, I think those are the kind of things. So just to illustrate, and I know we're limited on time, so I'm gonna try and connect a dot to, like, nearly anyone in any business is probably going to have something like an office supplies request list. Like, how do you know how do you like enable people to, like, say, I need new whatever, a new pen or what news, whatever, right? Exactly. Like, we're running low on printer paper, or we're running low on staples, or we're running low on whatever. And, like, I mean, you could just email somebody, right? But then all the problems that you talked about. And I was thinking about even like a maintenance request. I know we've had clients that have been like, well, we've got 2 maintenance people, we've got like 7 different or 8 different locations, and they'll go request by request because it hits their email. But sometimes they'll go to a location, they'll come back, and they realize there were 2 other requests for that same location they missed because they couldn't look at the data all in one place very easily. Yep. And so, like, there's probably a lot of different use cases for this that, like, instead of like being an Excel spreadsheet that you're manually entering, that you could make use of. So I love I was just trying to connect some simplistic examples, because you're absolutely right. There's so much power in this, and it's very easy to use.
And the best part that we've seen is the ability to pull that into whatever team you're working in. And so it's like you add it as a tab, and we do that internally at MyTech as well. So it's not like they even have to go hunt down where they're supposed to make submit that request. You know, there's a tab in the team and ready to go and easy to find, which is what I really love about the integration with 365 apps.
Yeah, and there's a couple of points that we've hit on. One of them, again, is to reiterate that the stuff that we're showing right now, all of this is included as part of an M365 license, right? So even if I'm talking about using Power Apps, which is another product for Microsoft, and it's in another product group, they've included some of these features as part of your M365 license before you need to get a premium license. So even by seeing Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power BI, people look at those and go, ooh, that's more licensing, I don't want to touch it. But I can come out here and say, Power Apps, I want to, I could spend a whole hour talking about this topic, but so I come out here and say, customize forms, and I'll let it do its wizard stuff. It's going to create a form for me. So the licensing is set up that if I wanted to get premium licensing with Power Apps to do all kinds of other crazy stuff, I can pay that additional fee. But extending M365 list forms is included with our licensing. So that's something that a lot of people don't know. And that challenges people to look into it. That, and then I would say that there's a little bit more they get a little daunted when they get to this page, right? So they get to this page.
It looks
and
way
like,
more technically complex, Wes. I almost don't even want to touch anything on this screen at this point.
Exactly. It's a developer page, right?
Yeah, right.
And so like this is, I'll say this every single time because I talk about Power Apps a lot. It's Microsoft markets this as for every user. It is very much not for every user.
Yeah, I would agree.
I showed you a wizard. I clicked one button to get here. That was a wizard, and that's all fine and good. But what it's really doing is it's opening up a door that say, hey, here's something. If you want to spend some more time ramping up on using this tool, there are some really cool things that you can do with it. And I can basically fully customize a form, one form or many forms, or one or many pages to build a lot of stuff. There's a skill ramp up. There's absolutely a skill ramp up in order to be able to use this. But it's something that's available to people that they don't generally know that's there.
But like you said, crawl, walk, run, like you can get to the walk phase by just using lists and the forms and then the views, right? Like in customizing it that, and you can get a little bit more advanced if you just start building some notifications, and some alerts. Like those are some things you can do. It's not the run. This doesn't get to that page, right? And so there's still tons of power and some that's simple to be able to use.
Yeah, and you can. The great part is that you can spin a list up and create that form that we created very, very quickly. So you can be working with that level of complexity for a long time before you start introducing all of the other ones. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to add too is that, and this is kind of, I think, Nina, to what you were saying, is this is the technology part of it. There's still a process piece of it that people need to understand, right? It's that so that there aren't people creating requests and, I have 5 people that are calling me on the phone. I have 10 people that are sending me emails. The process piece of it, and this gets back to, the all-encompassing governance umbrella that we, is that huge buzzword.
Easy. You'll get Nina on her soapbox.
My favorite topic.
but you have to say, if you want to request this, you have to go to this form.
Yep.
And that's why I'll do something like when we create these forms, right? I get to that really easy one that looks like this, and it gives me an email for it. I might do something like, if my department if this is a key part of what my department does, I might do something like this. I might put a link in the footer of my email that they can click on, and so it's one really easy place to find it. Yeah. I might put it on my SharePoint page. I might put it on a Teams page. Like I can expose the entry point to those requests wherever I want. And if everyone's collecting whatever information they need and they broadcast those entry points, then that's a great way to get past those first couple of steps in the governance, challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Well, Wes, I think you have planned 20 some more or 30 more minutes of content, and we only have 7 minutes. So, so sorry. So let's rock and roll. Keep going.
Let's just I'll just flip through these so that we can see if there's any other highlighted ones that we want to capture. The roles thing is something that I get really, I don't want to say stuck on, but I focus on a lot, right? Because there's perspectives for both. I want to, as a requester, I want to be able to focus on the stuff I need to get into the process, and I want to make it not confusing and not cumbersome. So to me, being able to trim off those fields that they don't need to fill in goes a long ways. From a fulfiller's perspective, because I can control this list and this form and say, I need all of this data before I'm going to complete your request, that goes a long ways for me, because that's a nice consistent thing that I can control. Mm-hmm. So we talked about Microsoft lists. We didn't talk about Microsoft forms as much. What I just showed was, so Microsoft lists and the new forms that are part of it and Power Apps are all things that you use internally. Those are not things that you have access to from an external perspective. Microsoft Forms is the external facing version of this. So it's a little bit more consumer looking. And I do have ways of wiring it up so that if I fill out a Microsoft form, I can have it end up inside of a list or the data end up that way. So those are some of the tools that we talked about, and we can dig into those more if we want to later. We talked about the good, better, best, or crawl, walk, run. So start with a list, create the data. Now this is because I'm a data-driven person. That's the way that I've always looked at stuff. So to me, starting with a list is the most important thing. And don't get hung up on having to do it perfect, because Microsoft Lists gives us the ability to go in there and say, "Oop, you know what? I didn't add a status field. I'm just going to jump back over to the list, add a status field, and we're all good to go." So choose the better forms. And then those are the things that we showed you, 1 and 2. If I wanted to get into 3, 4, and 5, these are all things that are available. Copilot has its own licensing, but adding workflows, building other interfaces, these are things that are still within our grasp, but they're more advanced. But it's a good way to see how you can kind of build out a more and more advanced solution. Now I'm going to talk about solutions instead of just an intake form. Things to think about from the Copilot perspective. If your organization is advanced enough to have Microsoft 365 Copilot, there are some tools and I don't want to say wizards, but there are some ways that you can accelerate the creation process. So those are things that you'll get as part of that. Something to think about for later is that this data that you're collecting, now it's part of the cloud. It's in that scope of information, and you're going to be able to build copilots based on that data. So you're not going to build a copilot based on your parking lot data, but you might do it on your user adoption, your training requests, your travel requests, things that are more business specific. So that's coming. There's ways that you can do it now, but it's a lot more. It's very new and still in the entry phase. So those are the things that I wanted to talk about. If there are other questions, we can.
So Wes, I go back to that last screen if you wouldn't mind, and show that so we talked a lot about the requester, getting the right data, but we didn't talk a lot about the fulfillers because I have a couple. The reason why I bring this up is because I have a couple examples of clients of ours, and actually using the extra forms feature, I think might help them manage this a little bit better. Because I remember having a client. They came to us and they said, "Look, we've got an Excel spreadsheet. So we have an accounting team, and they're trying to manage tasks that can be done by anybody on the team, and so they put them on an Excel spreadsheet." And so we talked to them about lists would be a better way to do it, because they I don't know, Excel just it didn't give them a great way of making sure that it's okay, I'm in progress on this one, right? And then but with lists, you can have an assigned to field. You can say, "Hey, I'm working on this one. I've got this," and so you can easily allow multiple people to do the fulfilling side, and it could be a team. If there's anything that anyone on the team can do it, it doesn't have to be assigned to a particular person. It's just knock them out as they come in. Yep. That's something. I also imagine things if the redundancy conversation that you brought up earlier, if you're doing an office supply request, and the person that normally does office supplies is on vacation, and someone's got to make an order, well, they should be able to see to the last request that they had already fulfilled or something like that, right? Yeah. They'd be able to see. So I think there's some real value. I know you touched on it, but we spent more of our time on getting the data, building it and getting the data in. But if you have any of those kind of scenarios, if you're trying to manage action items off of a list, or you're trying to share action items kind of across the team, a list could be better than even a planner, I think sometimes, or Excel spreadsheet. So I think there's some use cases to try and get people thinking. I imagine you have others, but I find that those are sometimes valuable to say, okay, take what we just showed, try and think about how this applies to your world. Do you have some other examples other than the parking, assigning a parking pass? I'm sure you do.
Yep. Is it sharing?
Yeah, it's not. I don't know, Stephanie, if you might be able to move that. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Thank you.
So one of the other examples that I love to give is, because I've worked with a lot of city and county organizations, is Department of Public Works, right? So that was something where, and this brings in the Power Apps piece of it as well, is that they have a lot of folks that are driving around the city, right? So when there's a sign down, when there's a light out, when there's whatever, back in the day, there wasn't a way for us to get information from outside of SharePoint into SharePoint. So we did it with email, right? Because there used to be this email-enabled document library. That was kind of the only way to cross that threshold. Now we can build a Power App, and I can build a mobile Power App, right? So you saw it in here when I say create an app. The default, I'll just click on it. The default of this is that it's going to create a mobile app. And so that's one thing where you can create a mobile interface where you can collect that same information. And they would be able to say, oh, the light is out at this location. In fact, using the mobile app, you have other things that you have access to that you don't on your desktop machine. You have things like GPS. So I could collect that from my phone, enter that as part of my request, and say the light is out at this location. So this takes a little bit more work. So it creates what would be a mobile app. But so that's one example where they would have people driving around. They might have the police driving around, right? Saying, "Oh, I just hit this huge pothole. I'm going to register that in there." But then I would create a triage, basically a triage page or app where someone in charge or someone at a higher level can say, okay, we've got these 15 things that are open. I'm going to assign this to that person, this to that person, this to that person. I'm going to create a view for each of those people so I can come in here and say, oh, I'm, Bob in whatever. I have a page that shows Bob all of the things that are on his to-do list and prioritizes them. Or I might do something where, like you were mentioning, if I have multiple people that can draw from the same stuff, I might go in there and say, I might go in there and add a button that says, I'm going to take this one, right? So that way it stops that confusion piece. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can manage that type of information. But it comes down to, I've got different roles that you need to identify and kind of figure out what each of those roles needs. When we get to that point, you can either stitch together a whole bunch of things within the SharePoint or within the lists interface, or you can extend it and get into things like Power Apps. So I might build multiple apps to kind of manage that data too. There's a bunch of ways to go, but it all starts with the roles and understanding where's the information coming from, who's processing it, who's getting assigned work, and that type of thing. So you have to spend a little bit of time, again, with the governance side, understanding what that is before you build these things out. But the nice thing is that back in the day, we would write this ginormous program app solution that did all that stuff, and changing it was a huge effort. Now I'm talking about building, here's my list, here's this component, here's that component, here's that component, and I can continue to iterate it much more quickly and much more easily without breaking all the other stuff. So there's a lot of really neat stuff that's part of the M365 platform that lets me do that.
Yeah. Nina, you've and I know we're kind of a little over time, but so let's try and work towards wrapping up. But I want to give you a chance. Are there any scenarios that you've thought about or that you've run across where you've seen a use case that might help, provide another illustration?
A couple clients have been using it for expenses and a lot for kind of inventory tracking and that type of thing, and or putting in requests for inventory. One was using it, their marketing department, for checking in and checking out swag and kind of related items when they did events and things like that. So yeah, just pretty much anything you can think of.
Onboarding and training are two of the other big ones I see. Onboarding's that's a rabbit hole, because it's something where you say, I've got this employee or these employees starting on this date, and then you can kind of get into all of the different things that need to be done for that type of employee. And so that tends to spin off other workflows, right? Other workflows and approvals and things like that. But it gives us access, it gives us visibility to it, right? So I can say it's nice for facilities people to look at a list and say, oh, I've got 15 people starting on this date. I need to make sure that their cubes are there and their chairs are there, and all this fun stuff. So those are big ones. Like from a training perspective, it might be a training request type of solution that you would build. It might be a list of training resources, right? It might be, here's a whole bunch of things. Nowadays we could create a list with Copilot prompts in it. right? So
Mhm.
there's
Nina's been building out that for us. We got a lot of that in our organization. Yeah.
Thank goodness. Yeah. Yeah. The other one that we've been using it for is actually for onboarding. So, what all the kind of training resources, useful links, videos you should be watching, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days.
Yeah.
Because it's a pretty comprehensive list. And then we actually have one list that contains all of the sales training resources and onboarding resources, but then with views, manage it for different roles. So we're managing it in one place and not having to duplicate effort with having multiple lists for multiple roles, because some of the stuff overlaps. And so, yeah, that's been a really good resource.
And there's so many ways you can extend those too. The first use case I had that got me into SharePoint was basically second level service documents. So you could even use that example when you're talking about your onboarding, right? You might say, all right, here's the list of resources. I'm going to add a review date to each one of those, right? Because those will expire or those will get stale. We wanted to add, we needed to add, here's the date it was added, here's the date it was approved, here's the date I need to look at it again. That's something that you're not going to have access to on your piece of paper over in the corner. If you put it into a list, now I can create a view that says, show me all of the stuff that fits this date criteria, so I can look at it and I can address those. I can keep all of my stuff current. So there's all sorts of ways that you can extend that data.
Well, we actually on that part, we've been trying to do that. Speaking of governance, and if you get into the different policy management. So if you're actually working on any type of compliance regime, part of it is having policies defined and policies reviewed, and like capturing, and like, so that what you just described is one of the things you can apply of what was the last date review, when's the next review date, and you can make sure that you can actually then have a filter to say, yep, it was reviewed on this date. Now you should also document it probably in the document that it was reviewed on this date, but that way at least allows you to sort and filter by that as you're trying to keep your policies and systems up to date in that capacity too.
Yep. And then you get ahead of it, right? You can send out notifications 2 weeks in advance that says, hey, this document needs to be reviewed by this date.
Yeah, and all of that too is part of showing evidence that you're doing it. Like, that's the other thing that's really nice, is that's a big part of it. Again, we're getting a little off the topic, but these are practical use scenarios of like things that there's so much that our world, especially the people that are in any business leadership, department leadership position, there's so many different variables and tasks and initiatives and recurring things that you need to keep track of, and lists is one of those things that gives you a lot of a very simple, it's you can crawl walk very simply and actually help you solve it. And then if you need to run, you're not ready to run, you just hire somebody like you. That's Wes. That's it's like, I'm not ready to run yet. I'm still like a toddler, like my little son. If I'm trying to run, I'll trip on myself. All right. Any final thoughts before we sign off? No? All right. Well, thanks a lot, Wes, for taking us through some of the simple things. I feel like this is a great example of, I've been working with lists for years, and there's some new stuff that I learned today, and we just really stuck to the basics. And I mean, really, so I love that. I think that's, once you scratch the surface, there's always a little more to learn. And so come back next time. We'll be back next month. I don't know the topic yet. We're still working up and lining up some speakers, but join us, and hopefully, and join our LinkedIn community on LinkedIn, the Microsoft 365 Champion community. We're really, and if you have questions, one thing I'd love to challenge people to do, if you have questions, topics you want to hear more about, post them in there, and we either try and correspond with you, or maybe that'll help us line up a speaker that'll bring some value, so we can all work towards helping each other unlock the potential of Microsoft 365. So Wes, thanks for your time today. We'll look forward to seeing you again on a future session. Until then, I'll probably see you in a couple of weeks at the event at the Microsoft Center here later this month.
Next Friday.
That's right. We'll see you then.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. See you later.